I want to go back to the population growth story here. And Guy, the question, I guess, is whether Australia has right now something of a housing crisis. It's got a housing shortage. You've got rents rising very quickly. You've got the pressure on the energy infrastructure rollout. Can Australia right now sustain another 1.5 million people over the next 5 years?
I'm not sure I can get into the detail of how sustainable that is, Ross, but one thing I want to pick up on, though, which we can't sustain, though, is around the energy transmission. And that is one of the, again, the Prime Minister mentioned with the rewiring the nation, you picked it up just then as one of the key focuses of Schneider. What we can't do is have all those people without a grid which can support them. And we don't have a grid today, or we have a grid which is really creaking. Yeah. And we're deploying all this new capacity into that grid in prospect, and we've got to get that energy from where it is, or where it's generated, to where the demand is, for where people are going to use it, for where companies are going to use it. We don't have that. Transmission, I think, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, challenge in the energy transition.
And does that potentially risk us meeting all of those emissions reductions by 2030 and out to 2050?
Yeah, so to pick up on your point, so electrification is probably 80% of the decarbonisation path for the economy. For households, my fellow MIT alum Saul Griffiths, electrify everything. So for households, it's about 100% of the story. For the Australian economy generally, it's probably 80% of the story. But to electrify everything, you need to get the electricity into everything, and so you need the wires and you need the transmission. So the generation needs to be deployed, but where the generation is going to be is not where it's been historically, and so you need the wires to get it there.
But then to come back to the point, doesn't extra population put even more pressure on that whole system, on the grid, and then the need for that networking, the transmission, to be put out fairly urgently?
We have that, I mean, to some extent, leaving aside that population growth, we have that urgency now.
Yes.
We've had it for the better part of the past decade. So that's nothing new. It will add more to that. But to pick up on the point you made, we also need some people to install that capacity, to install both the generation and to install the transmission. So we've got to have those people. They're not all necessarily in Australia today. And so, those skills we need, and we either need to generate them locally or redeploy them locally, and I think there's plenty of opportunity for that, but we probably also need a few people with those skills which don't exist.
Which goes to the migration review that the government has already announced as well. Lisa, I'll come and pick this up with you because you've gone to the whole science, your business is really all about the science of the energy transition. Is there anything which obviates this need to be able to move electricity from point A to point B? The reason I'm asking that is because, again, if science is one of the answers, right now you've got a lot of people, farmers, potentially, people who wouldn't have wanted gas pipelines through their properties, now saying, I don't want those, transmission lines, that high voltage transmission lines through my property. Is there any answer to this, or is this something that should have been worked out well and truly a long time ago, and now there's a bit of catch-up having to be done?
Community consultations have to be done to bring people along on the journey. But to your question, absolutely. There's a lot of discussion about the supply side of the equation. How can we get enough of that grid scale renewables through the transmission system, through the distribution lines to the consumer? And there's two things that we need to be thinking about in order to make the full decarbonisation of the grid actually possible. The first is that we need to make sure that we're actually thinking about the demand side of the equation, right? So how can we use electricity or energy more efficiently? And also, how can we use it at the right times of day when electricity is cheap and plentiful? So if we have, middle of the day, if we look ahead 10, 15 years and we have a massive tax on the system in EVs, tax in terms of more demand. So if we have more demand in the system from EVs, for example, we don't want everyone coming home and charging at 6 o'clock, right? Because that will put a burden on the system that would require an overbuild of the system and therefore a higher investment than what's actually needed than if you manage the times of day where energy is consumed. So those are two really important things. And the other one is actually taking the opportunity that we have in the short term to install more distributed energy resources, put more solar PV on rooftops and and buildings. And those are things that we can do now that can alleviate the amount of investment that's required, but also speed up the transition.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kieran, because even here, and looking around even your staff and so forth, they're now required to live in capital cities where housing and rents is becoming an issue for them, where many people who might be public servants or others are now considering leaving the big cities because they're becoming increasingly unaffordable. Housing, cost of living, the whole thing. Is this, especially again, coupled with skills shortages, which goes back to the population story, is that an increasing stress for you in running a business such as this?
There's a couple of issues there. So, go back to the immigration and the population growth. When we reach out to people to try to bring them into Australia, bring them into Crown, first thing they look at is the fairly complex immigration process. It's getting better, and it's fantastic to see that the government's looking to review that. The other thing they look at, and these are people who are very much in demand, so they look at that issue, then they look at when I get there, the cost of living is much higher than wherever it is they may be coming from, and looks like increasing over a period of time. Plus, if I get myself over those two hurdles, where am I going to live when I get there? So it becomes a compounding issue. We have this triple threat of visa issues in terms of the length of time taken to get it done, the cost of living and housing. So that becomes a genuine impact on us in terms of bringing in the skill sets. Then in terms of what's happening within our CBDs and the lack of vibrancy that we're seeing, particularly through the weekend, and the work from home impact. So not only are people moving further out from the cities, anybody that does work in the city isn't working in the city as often as they used to. And that's having an impact. So again, if we look more specifically to Melbourne, nightlife, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, places booming, it's fantastic. During the day, not so much. And in a business like ours and like many others, it's not just about being successful at the peaks. You've got to make sure that you're managing through those shoulder periods as well and driving and optimising, whether it's through hotel occupancy, food and beverage covers, etc. So the work from home dynamic, people moving further out from the cities, that's also creating a challenge for us.
So final one for each of you as I go through. Guy, are you optimistic for Australia over the next couple of years and then beyond out to the next decade?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're talking about rising interest rates, and Andrew referenced the 90s recession, all right? I mean, I came from Adelaide and my whole generation left town, all right? So just a couple of things bearing in mind. One, interest rates have gone up a lot, but they did come at, I'm not defending my old job, but they were low. If you told someone in 1989, 1990 where interest rates are today, they'd think that were extraordinarily low. So, but they are causing some issues for households.
Well, mortgages are so much bigger now. And so
no, that's right. But I suppose the other thing which I think often gets lost is, unemployment is 3.5%, or just over 3.5%. That's pretty good. In the history of this country, for the last couple of generations, that's about as good as it gets. Female participation is as high as it gets. So there is a lot of optimism to think about. And then to pick up on Lisa's point, we have this huge potential in front of us on the green energy space, which we haven't had in front of us for a long time. We've been the quarry for the world for the last 20, 30 years. The green energy is that and a lot more in potential. We have to realise that potential. We can't just wake up one day and think, here we are, green energy superpower. But we have that capacity because we have great sun, great wind, and a hell of a lot of land to deploy it on. So that gives you, that gives me a hell of a lot of grounds for optimism.
That's good. Ross? I can't let you go without asking. The Prime Minister was here today. Did he tap you on the shoulder while you were here?
He said hello.
Yeah. Nothing else? No job offer? Nothing else?
Again, I think as he said, as much as the Australian and Sky would love a scoop, it's probably not where it's going to come from.
That's good, very good. Lisa, are you an optimist for Australia and the way in which his energy transition is rolling out?
I am, and the transition is an economic imperative, right? We know that we have to transition, not just because 20 years from now in 2043, all of today's existing coal assets will have been retired, right? So the transition is coming regardless, but it's also something that's quite an economic imperative. It's estimated that the costs of climate change just in natural disasters alone will be 1.2 trillion by the time we get to 2040. So it's a massive cost on our economy. So we really need to take advantage of the opportunity that we do have to transition our energy system. I mean, look at New York City right now, right? It's red with smoke from bushfires in Canada. And it was just a couple years ago that Melbourne was the same, where I live. And it's not just bushfires and smoke right now. We've got droughts and floods and severe storms, and these are not only exacerbated by climate change but made more frequent. So I know that we've got the opportunities to transition and do it well, and to learn from that, because it won't be the only big transformation that's coming for the next few decades. Right after that, we probably have a transformation that's going to be required around water security and then food security. So we have a lot to learn, and I'm really excited for what we can do here in Australia.
Kieran, you in this game, you've got to be an optimist, for God's sake, surely.
If I was a betting man. If I was a betting man. So, I mean, you can't not be optimistic. I left to come to Australia in 1989. It's been a long walk to get here. I moved my family here 20 years ago. I've been commuting from Asia every 6 weeks pre-COVID to get here. There's such an energy and a buzz about the demographic here, the persona of what it is to be Australian, the diversity of the culture here. And then when you look in my world, people still want to be entertained. People want to escape. People want to be have wonderful experiences. They want to enjoy life. And we're seeing that post-COVID, people coming back more and more. Been a bit more careful with the money. Discretionary spend has definitely been impacted. People are booking a suite rather than booking a villa. The booking period is a little shorter because you don't know, is there going to be another interest rate? If I book it a month out, is something going to happen between now and then? So there's some definitely changes in behaviour, but the basis of, I want to have a good time, I want to be entertained, I want to go somewhere that's just classy, I want to go somewhere that's safe, I want to enjoy life. What's not to be optimistic about?
I've got to say, Kieran Carruthers, Lisa Zembrot, Guy Debelle, many thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Russ.
Thanks for having me.
Well done, guys.
Thank you.